Hey there, Mustangs. Rosenwald here again with another set of notes for us to go through together. Hope you guys have been doing well and that you're not having too many problems with this. Just remember, one of the key points to all this is going through the steps. That what we're looking for is, as you can see on the top here, we're trying to look for a GCF. We're trying to figure out if there's the difference of squares, if the leading coefficient is equal to 1, if the leading coefficient is not equal to 1, and can we use decimals? And remember, decimals is your go-to to check everything. So let's kind of get to these, and we've got 10 problems we're going to try to get through here. If at any point you feel like I went a little too quick, that's okay. Just make sure you go back, pause it, try it. I'll watch it again, but try to do the problems on your own too. This is a good way for you to kind of check to see where you're at with everything, okay? All right, so let's get moving. So to start us off here, when we look at the first one, we're going to look for first, is there a GCF? And in this case, yes, there is. The biggest thing I could divide 3 and 75 by is a 3. So let's go ahead and divide both of these by a 3. Not only that, they both carry an x with them. So I can divide both of these by an x as well. Okay. If we take that GCF out, what we're going to be left with here is a x squared minus a 25, because 75 divided by 3 is 25. If we go ahead and we look at this x squared minus 25, we then ask ourselves, well, is it the difference of squares? And in fact, it is. Remember that this is x times x, and this is 5 times 5. Okay? So if it's the difference of squares, let's write it as the difference of squares. It's going to be 3x, and then we're going to have the quantity x minus 5 and x plus 5. Okay? When we look at this, something important for you to recognize and remember is the fact that the degree that's in this, that's the highest exponent, tells you how many answers there are supposed to be in this problem. And if you look at this, there's a 3 right here. That tells us that there's going to be 3 different answers for this problem alone. So if I solve for each one of these, we have 3x is equal to 0. That means that x will equal 0 is one of my answers. Solve for this x right here, we have x minus 5 is equal to 0. That means that x equals 5 is one of my answers. And then if we look at x plus 5 and set that equal to 0, we end up with x is equal to negative 5. That is my third and final 0. Let's confirm this, though, on Desmos. Okay? When we go to Desmos, if I graph this first one here, that 3x cubed minus 75x, you'll see that there's 3 separate points where my graph turns red and it hits the x-axis. Okay? The first one here is at negative 5, which we just said. The second one is right here at 0. And the third one on the right there is at 5, 0. So you can see we have 3 different points where it hits the x-axis. Okay? Let's go back. Let's go on to number 2. Okay? Number 2, there's no GCF for 2, 3, and 20. However, this is not a difference of squares, and the leading coefficient is not 1. So this is where we try to do the multiplication, and we go ahead and figure out the factors that add up to the middle part. So let's start off with first doing a times c. That's 2 times negative 20, which gives us a negative 40. Okay, so now we have to figure out, well, what are the factors of negative 40 that will give me a negative 3? That's our goal here, is to get them to add up to a negative 3. List out your factors. We got 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. And the 2 that will give us that negative 3 is going to be 5 and 8. But in order to get that, we're going to have to do a 5 minus an 8. That's going to give us our negative 3 that we were looking for. And then the next step is, if you remember, we take and divide by that a value that's there. Well, my a value is equal to 2. Okay. Reduce each one of your fractions. 5 over 2 will not reduce. Negative 8 over 2 will reduce to be a negative 4. And then if you remember, the next step is just take the opposites. Since we're solving, we're not trying to factor, we're just solving. Take the opposites. And my first answer is going to be negative 5 over 2. And my second answer will be positive 4. That's just taking opposites of those answers. Okay, let's confirm it on our graph here. 2x squared minus 3x minus 20. You can see the first answer is right here at 4, 0, which we said. And then the second answer is right there at negative 2.5, 0. Now, negative 2.5, that is the same as a negative 5 over 2. Okay. Take a look at number 3. Let's start off first with, is there a GCF? Something I could divide 5, 15, and 90 by. And they do. They all have a 5 in common. So if I divide everything by 5, we'll be able to do that. And then let's look at all the x's. They all have at least one x in common. So since they all have at least one x in common, we could take that out as well. So that's going to leave me with a 5x coming out. And x squared is what's remaining, 3x, and then minus 18, and all that equals to 0. We look at that trinomial that's inside the parentheses there, and it's not the difference of squares. So then we ask, well, what are the factors? And it's not a leading coefficient more than 1, so we could just figure out what are the factors of 18 that will give me a negative 3. And when we look at that, those two factors, the numbers that will give me a negative 3, would be a negative 6 and a positive 3. That's because negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3. Negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3. And then negative 6 times 3 will give us negative 18. Let's go and write out our factored forms. And then we're solving each one of these. Now we're going to go quicker with this. So this first one is going to be x equals 0. Next one is going to be x equals 6. Remember, take the opposite. And then next one is x equals negative 3. Again, take the opposite. And again, the degree in this, that 3 tells us there should have been 3 answers for this entire problem here. Okay, let's go back to Desmos and take a look at that. And we can see 3 separate spots where it hits the x-axis. The first one is at negative 3. The next one is at 0. And the next one is at 6, like we just got. Okay. For number 4, let's zoom in on that one there. This one, there's no greatest common factor. It's not the difference of squares. The leading coefficient is greater than 1, so we got to go through and do the whole multiplication process. This is where we got a little bit of work, okay? So 3 times negative 8 gives us a negative 24. Factors of this, will be 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 4 and 6, okay? Now, again, we're trying to get a positive 10 from these. Now, this is where you have to be very careful. We have 2 answers here that will potentially work, okay? If I have a 12 and a 2, and I get a positive 10, 12 minus 2 will give me a positive 10. If I multiply those two together, it will give me a negative 24. So this is the one that's going to work for us here. But if I did 4 and 6, 4 plus 6 does equal 10. But 4 times 6 does not equal a negative 24. So this is one you have to really be careful with, okay? So we're going to use that 12 minus 2. We'll divide by the a value. We'll simplify our fractions. And then once they're reduced, we're going to go ahead and take those and take the opposites, and that should give us our answers. So negative 4 is the first answer, and positive 2 over 3 is my second answer. Now, positive 2 over 3, that's going to be a decimal. You'll see it in a second, but it's actually 0.67 or 0.6 repeating. Let's go to decimals. Okay, let's look at our 2 answers here. We got negative 4, which is the first one we just said. And if you look carefully at this next one, you can see that it's somewhere between 0 and 1. It's not a perfect spot. Let's click on it. You'll see it says 0.6667, which is 0.67, the same thing. Okay, 2/3. All right, let's go on to number 5. All right, full steam ahead on this. You guys ready? We're sprinting. If you get stuck, pause it for a second. But I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly. You ready? The GCF for this is 10. We're left with a 2x squared and a 7x and a 6. Okay, all that equals 0. 2 times 6 is going to equal 12. Whoops, I wrote 16. 2 times 6 is going to equal a 12. So we're trying to get my values to be factors of 12 that add up to 7. So we'll get 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. Okay. 3 and 4 obviously will add up to. So 3 plus 4 is 7. 3 times 4 is 12. We're going to divide by my a value. My a value in this is equal to 2 now. Because we factored out that 10 that's there, my a value is actually a 2 now. So that's the value that we're going to use in this. Okay. 3 over 2 is the reduced fraction. 4 over 2 is the reduced fraction. Take the opposites, we get negative 3. Oops, I don't know what that sign was. Negative 3 over 2 and negative 2. Now, negative 3 over 2 will give us a decimal. It's negative 1.5. So you'll see that in the answer there. But these are ultimately our 2 answers for this problem here. And again, let's look at decimals to confirm that answer. Okay, we'll just have to zoom out there. And you can see at -2, there's one of my answers. And then -1.5, there's your second answer. Okay. All right, let's go to number 6 right here. GCF, 12. They both have a 12 that I could divide by, and they both have an x. So let's take that 12x out. We are left with 2x. I'm going to actually show this one so you can see it, because the number one mistake that people do is they look at this and they say, oh, I could take a 12x out. And because I could take a 12x out, there's nothing left over here. Well, there is. There still is a spot there. You need to put that 1 that's right there. Okay. This 12x is equal to 0. That 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. X ends up equaling 0, and then x is equal to positive 1/2 if you add the 1 to the right and then divide both sides by 2. So we should get 0, and then 1/2, remember, is the same as a decimal of 0.5. So let's check our answer here on Desmos. You'll see we got a spot at 0, like we just said. And then we got a spot at 0.5, like we just said. Okay? All right, let's move down to the graphs that were already given to us. All we're doing is we're trying to solve these. And so this should go pretty quick. We're looking at where does it hit the x-axis, and let's write them as coordinates. Okay? The first spot, which is right here, is at -2. So we get x equals -2. And we talked about this in the first video, how this is a turning 0. So we count that 0 twice. It's actually x equals -2. You would write that twice. Okay. If I wanted to factor this, this would have been x minus 2 and then x minus 2. Now, I wanted to point out that there's actually a typo on this, that in order for us to actually be able to do this and look like this graph and this equation don't match up, this minus that's right here, it was actually supposed to be a plus sign. So we need to make that change on this, that this actually is supposed to be a plus sign here. Okay. And that means that this is supposed to be a plus sign and that this is supposed to be a plus sign. Okay. That's the only way that we can get x equals -2 for both of those answers on that. So there was a typo there. Hopefully you guys fix this, okay? All right, let's take a look at number 5. I'm sorry, number 8. What am I saying? Number 8. You can see when we look at this, we're looking for where it hits the x-axis, and you can see right here that my graph, which is up here, doesn't actually hit it. There's this gap between there. So when the equation doesn't hit the x-axis, we said that there are none, because there's no solutions. Okay, there's no way that that actually hits the axis. All right, 2 more. Quickly look at these. We can see there's one answer at x equals -3. That's one of my answers. And then we get another answer at 2, x equals 2. If I was to write these as x coordinates, let's go ahead and write those out as x-intercepts as -3, 0, and then 2, 0. Oh, I'm covering up my picture here, sorry. I'm going to move this up. All right, so now if we were to go ahead and try to factor this out here, since there's a negative there, we haven't really done this, but it's just good practice. If there's a negative in the front, factor that out. Just makes it easier. So if I took a -1, what we're left with is an x squared, a positive x, and then a -6, and that equals 0. Okay. We have -1. This would be x plus 3 and x minus 2. Because 3 minus 2 equals 1, and 3 times -2 equals -6. And then we can solve each one of those. We get x equals -3 and positive 2. All right. One more. Now, this one's a little bit of a doozy. I kind of gave Mr. Jones a hard time for putting this one in here, but nevertheless, it's one that we should practice, you know, and you could put in your calculator anyways, all right, or you could put it into Desmos. There's no way to factor this. 6 is not considered a perfect square. So what ends up happening is we get a square root for the answer. Now, you can do this using square roots. You guys haven't done this before, but what you do is you take x squared and you get it alone by making that 6 go to the right side. And then to undo the square that's here, we actually take the square root. This is called the square root method. We end up with x is equal to, and then it's plus or minus the square root of 6, which means that x is equal to plus or minus 2.45. Now you can see when you look at your graph that it really is close to like a little bit less than 2.5 right here, and it's a little bit less than like -2.5. So it's right about there. So it's a decimal, but it is what it is. It's just the equation that we chose. If you look on your graph here, I'm going to go ahead and type this one in, that when we get x squared minus 6, you can see from the graph that we get the same values that we just saw, but it's a negative 2.449 and negative 2.449 positive. So we get the same value on both sides. It's just a little bit different, nothing too crazy, but I mean, you guys can handle it. But that's it. So anyways, hopefully this helped. Your next task is to try to do day 2 homework practice. Please try to use the examples that we just gave you because they match up pretty easily. Use it as a guide. Go back and watch them. Slow it down. Do whatever you got to do, but you got it. Ultimately, the most important thing here is I need you to make sure you like and you subscribe to my page. Thanks and take care.